Welcome to the second to last of our study of the great enduring beliefs of the Christian faith, and today we are looking at the Lord's Day. My brother-in-law Mark spent his career in the United States Geological Survey, and one of the big projects that he worked on was mapping the Middle East for their water resources during one of the times when our government was trying to help find ways to bring peace to that region. Knowing where the water was and who has access to water in an arid place is very, very important. And so he did that. He spent a lot of time over there, and he said he learned very quickly that because that part of the world is the intersection of the three major monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, that you had to be careful which day that you tried to meet with the teams you're collaborating with, because he was meeting with people on the teams who were Muslim and who were Jewish and who were Christian, and Fridays were out for the Muslims, and Saturdays were out for the Jews, and Sundays were out for the Christians. And so oftentimes he had just a 4-day work week, which was a pretty good thing because it gave him more time to do some tourism in that just endlessly fascinating part of the world. But that brings up the question, when we're talking about the Lord's Day, which day is it? Now, we are not, don't have connections to the Muslim faith. It grew out of, actually, some of the Christian and Jewish writings and whatnot. But we do have access, of course, to the Jewish faith. And most Christians would say that Sunday is the Christian Sabbath, but not all Christians. Seventh-day Adventists, and there are some Seventh-day Baptists, and there are some others who say the Bible never ever said that we're moving the Lord's Day from Saturday to Sunday, and so we're going to observe it on Saturday. Here in Chattanooga, we have just right up the road the Southern Adventist University and a number of Seventh-day Adventists. A couple of my dear friends on our staff here at church are Seventh-day Adventists, and they've taught me so much about observing the Sabbath, so much about how seriously they take it and how joyfully they take it. And their conviction is the Bible never said to move it to Sunday, and they observe it the way that the Jewish people observe it. It begins with sundown on Friday and it ends with sundown on Saturday, and I really do appreciate that. However, we do know that by the end of the first century, the early church was by and large at least worshiping on Sundays, and Sundays often were not for them a day of rest. Sunday was the first day of the week in the Roman world, and it was a work day, and so the church would often gather at dawn, either in someone's home or perhaps during a time of persecution in a catacomb or someplace that was secret and hidden, or oftentimes they would gather in a cemetery to remind themselves that we serve a living Lord who is not confined to a cemetery. They would worship, they would have communion, and then they would go on and have their day, and it might be a work day for them. John of Patmos, writing Revelation, says that he gets this vision on the Lord's Day, but he doesn't tell us which day of the week that was. And I've always kind of said that you come into that book, you already have your idea about what you think it is, and it's obvious to you. Well, obviously it was Saturday if that was my idea, or obviously it was Sunday if that was my idea, but he doesn't tell us. And so the Lord's Day in some ways may move around a little bit, but it is important that we have a Lord's Day. It's important that we observe a Lord's Day because it is commanded that we do it. Isn't it amazing that God had to, in the 10 Commandments, command us to rest? You would think that we wouldn't have to be forced to do that or commanded to do that, and yet there it is in the 10 Commandments. You shall observe the Sabbath, and you shall keep that day holy. Well, I do like to tease that I wrote the book on keeping Sabbath, and in a sense I did. This is my Doctor of Ministry dissertation, and it is on Sabbath, considered as Sunday, but not necessarily exclusively on Sunday. I also like to tease when I was working on it. People would say, well, what are you doing your dissertation on? And I would say, well, I'm working on the Sabbath. But because I've written the book, you may be in for a long lesson. I hope not, and I'm planning to make it pretty quickly. But I do want to share with you what I learned back in the 2002, I think it's when I finally finished it. And part of what, as I was working on that, I began thinking about the tradition that my mother had when I was a child. We would go to church, my sisters and I and my mother. At that time, my father didn't typically go to church with us. Later, he did. And then we would come home, and we wouldn't go to a restaurant out to eat or whatever. Instead, Mom would go to the refrigerator, and she would pull out all the leftovers from the week before. But rather than saying, well, we're having leftovers and it's just too bad, she would say, we're having a tasting party. You get to taste a little bit of this, and you get to taste a little bit of that. And she kind of made it a celebration. And it was a wonderful thing, because what it meant was that she didn't have to work and prepare this big meal. She had already done that much during the week. But rather than being some kind of drudgery thing, we got to have a tasting party. And to this day, I love leftovers. I think it's partly because of that, because of that model that she gave me for Sabbath keeping. And so when I was writing the book, or the dissertation, I began thinking about the Sabbath table, and literally you put food on the table, but I began seeing that Sabbath is like a table that has 4 legs, and just like any table, if you remove one leg, it's going to be unstable and wobbly, and it's not going to work. You have to have all 4, and they have to be the same length and kind of equal emphasis on all of them. And the 4 legs that I came up with was Sabbath is a spiritual discipline, Sabbath is a gift, Sabbath is a communal exercise, something we do together, and Sabbath is a prophetic witness. And so I want to go really quickly through all 4 of those legs and see if we can't learn a little bit about the Lord's Day and maybe recommit ourselves as well to observing the Sabbath. So first, it's a spiritual discipline, and we don't really like that word discipline. It sounds like something that we're forced to do and maybe takes all the fun out of life. But Richard Foster, who famously wrote the book Celebration of Discipline about the spiritual disciplines, says that spiritual disciplines are doorways to liberation. And what he means is that we have to be intentional about a discipline, whatever that discipline might be: prayer, fasting, keeping Sabbath. We have to schedule it. We have to plan for it. We have to be intentional about it, or it just won't happen. Probably one of the reasons it's in the commandment, because God has to say, you have to make sure that you do this. And when we follow the spiritual disciplines, including keeping the Sabbath, our faith becomes not just something that's up in our head, something we believe, but it becomes a way of life, and it shapes us and it forms us exactly as we want it to. It may interest you to find out that in the Old Testament, when God is giving the law, there are only 2 sins that carry a double penalty. And the double penalty is execution and being cut off from the people. And it's actually not clear what it means to be cut off from the people. If you're executed, it seems like almost by definition you were cut off from the people. But this was an additional penalty. And the 2 sins that called for that were idolatry and breaking the Sabbath. And I think part of the reason that is that they're kind of mirror images of each other. Idolatry is turning away from God and worshiping something else. And Sabbath keeping is actually turning towards God and recognizing that we do worship God and we take time to rest, but that rest also includes thanking God for the rest. It includes worshiping God and recentering ourselves in as a people of God. And so if we break the Sabbath, it's almost like committing adultery, because we have turned away from God. And there, of course, is the danger that we're going to pull the community away as well. If I'm doing something else on the Sabbath and I'm not with the community may decide, well, they can do that as well and pull them away. So it's incredibly dangerous. And so both of those sins call for execution and for being cut off from the people. Now we wouldn't stone someone for breaking the Sabbath today. That has really passed away. But the point is how serious it is. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, are there exemptions? And of course there are. And there are exemptions in the law. First responders in our society, we want to be able to work on the Sabbath. We want to have pastors who will share with us and work with us, work for us on the Sabbath, serve us on the Sabbath. But we do need to make sure that we don't expand those exemptions out too much. It's so easy to say, well, my ox is in the ditch today. I'm not going to go to church. My ox is in the ditch today. I'm going to break the Sabbath. It's also easy to ask other people to work for us on the Sabbath in ways that we don't have to. And that really brings me to the second leg of the table, and that is that Sabbath is a gift. So it's a discipline. I have to plan on it, but it's also a gift. And if I'm gonna take advantage of the gift, I have to fully accept it. The Sabbath commandment in the Ten Commandments is the only commandment that is for everyone, and the only commandment that even extends out to animals. And so God says that you shall not work, but your son and your daughter, they shall not work. Don't make the kids work. Your female slave or your male slave, they are not to work. The alien resident in your town, somebody not of your religion, somebody not of your country's background, whatever, they shall not work. And even your livestock shall not work on the Sabbath. This is a gift that God gives to everybody, and it's because God has grounded it in creation. On the seventh day, God rests, and by implication, the entire creation rested then as well. And so built into all of creation is the idea that we rest, and that every 7 days we have a day of rest and a day of worship, and that goes for everyone. And that's important. They receive the commandments after they escape from Egypt and from Pharaoh, and there's a huge contrast there. If you are a servant or a slave of Pharaoh, you don't get a day off. But if you're the servant or the slave of God, God gives you this day off and asks you to gift it to the wider community. Now, I sometimes go to restaurants on Sundays and enjoy that and want to do that. But more often than not, if I can, I try to avoid restaurants and I try to avoid any kind of commerce on a Sunday, because that forces other people to work. What's the first thing the person who comes up to your table says? Hi, my name is so-and-so. I'll be your server today. I'll be serving you today. Well, God says your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, the alien resident of your land, even your livestock, they can't work, and so I can't ask them to serve. And again, I don't want to be legalistic about it. Sometimes going to a restaurant accomplishes a greater purpose, so particularly if it's going out with several friends, people that I need to spend some time with or whatever. But if there's a way around that, I try to make it, and I realize that I can wait until the next day to engage in whatever commerce it is that I need to engage in, or whatever it is that I might need to do. You may remember at one point Jesus' disciples are making their way through a grain field on the Sabbath, and they're plucking off the heads of the grain and they're eating them, and they're criticized. They're breaking the Sabbath. And as a part of his rebuke of those they're criticizing, Jesus says human beings weren't made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for human beings. And so we accept this gift. We see it as a gift. Gosh, God made the Sabbath for us. And then we extend that gift to others. Well, that kind of connects as well to the next leg, which is Sabbath is communal. It's not only for everyone, even those outside the faith, but even more importantly, it's for all of us who are inside the faith to celebrate and observe together. We can keep Sabbath alone, and there may be some times when you just need a day off from everybody. I understand it. That's fine. And that can be a wonderful use of Sabbath. But Sabbath, ideally, more often than not, is going to be communal, and it's going to be celebrated with your brothers and sisters in the faith. We need to find ways in church, not just to say, well, I came to church and I checked that off my list, but how am I connecting to my brothers and sisters in Christ in church? Small groups, Sunday school groups, Bible study groups, that's a great way of doing that. A couple of years ago, we began the process, or renewed the process, or the procedure in our worship services of having a time where we pass the peace. And that's one of the most wonderful times of the service. I think some of our people look forward to that the most, and people go all over the sanctuary, shaking hands and hugging and passing the peace of Christ and having just that moment or two to catch up. And it is this wonderful communal time. The potlucks that we have once a month are a wonderful time to get to sit with people and enjoy having a meal together. And as a potluck, it's almost like a tasting party like my mother had. And then from time to time, our youth group sponsors intergenerational hikes or other opportunities. What a great way to get out together. Someone said recently that the church is the last institution left in our culture that is truly intergenerational. You can come to church and find a newborn. You can come to church and interact with somebody who's 100 years old, and everyone in between. Church is for everyone. The Sabbath is for everyone. We should take advantage of it. I almost hesitate to say this, but it's just so wonderful. I want to share it. In Judaism, oftentimes married couples are encouraged to make love on the Sabbath because they are coming together as a community in the most intimate way they can. And so Sabbath is something for us to do together. Jesus healed on the Sabbath, I think, because it was communal. And if there is a leper who cannot come into the community, if there's a person who cannot walk and is left outside, that's not good enough. If everyone can't celebrate, it's almost like then no one should. And so Jesus joyfully, gladly heals a leper on the Sabbath so that he or she can come into the community. Heals a person who is unable to walk so that they can come into the assembly and celebrate with everyone. Sabbath is meant to be a community. And then finally, Sabbath is a prophetic witness. We live in a world that is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that is a temptation, oftentimes, I think, to worship mammon. I have to keep going so I can make more and more and more money. And it is turning away from the commandment to keep the Sabbath. It is giving ourselves over to a slave master that insists on 24/7, 365. And when we as a church, when we as Christians say no, I won't do that, we're actually making a prophetic witness. Someone once said that Christianity is better caught than taught. And when people see Christians as a joyful community who are coming together to rest and to worship and to live their lives together, and who don't have to constantly be accomplishing things and doing things and making money, that is a huge draw, I think, for people. And we can help people see that as that prophetic witness. Someone once said that we live in a culture now that is suffering from a pandemic of loneliness. And so when we say no, everyone is welcome. And we're going to celebrate our Lord together. We're going to celebrate one another together. We're going to encourage one another, laugh with one another, sing with one another on the whatever day the Sabbath might be for us. What a wonderful witness that is for us. Someone suggested to me recently that busy is the new fine. Somebody says, "How you doing?" And I say, "I'm just so busy." And it's really a way of saying, don't I matter? Doesn't my life matter? I'm so busy. I'm constantly turning. God would say, in some ways, I want you to be busy. I want you to give your life for the gospel, but also as a part of that, accept the gift of rest once every 7 days. And I'm not judging you on how busy you are. I'm judging you on how faithful you are. And one of the ways you can be faithful is to take a time of rest and to offer that rest to others. Well, let me close with a poem. Seitz Buning wrote this poem, Obedience, and it was him looking back at a time in his childhood. His parents were farmers, and there was a day when they had to decide whether to go to church or to try to harvest their oats before a big storm came in. And I'm going to read not the entire poem, but most of it. And I think it's a wonderful way to sum up what we've been saying today about the Lord's Day. So the name of the poem is Obedience, and he writes, "Were my parents right or wrong not to mow the ripe oats that Sunday morning with the rainstorm threatening? I reminded them that the Sabbath was made for man and of the ox fallen in the pit. Without an oats crop, I argued, the cattle would need to survive on town-bought oats, and then it wouldn't pay to keep them. Isn't selling a cattle at a loss like an ox in a pit?" My parents did not argue. We went to church. We sang the usual psalms louder than usual. We and the others whose harvests were at stake. The pastor made no concession on sermon length. 5 good reasons for infant baptism, though we heard little of it. For more floods came and more winds blew and beat upon that house than we had figured upon even. More lightning and thunder and hail the size of pullet eggs. Falling branches snapped the electric wires. We sang the closing psalm without the organ and in the dark. Afterward, we rode by our oats field, flattened. Later, at dinner, Dad said, "God was testing us. I'm glad we went. Those psalms never gave me such a lift as this morning." Mother said, "I wouldn't have missed it." And even I thought, but did not say, how guilty we would feel now if we had saved the harvest. That one time Dad asked me why I live in a black neighborhood, I reminded him of that Sunday morning. Immediately, he understood. Fathers often fail to pass on to sons their harvest customs for harvesting grain or real estate or anything. No matter. So long as fathers pass on to sons another more important pattern, defined as absolutely as muddlers like us can manage, obedience. How important it is that we as fathers, that we as Christians who want to disciple the world are not passing along tips for how to harvest the oats, not passing along ways to get out of keeping the Sabbath, but rather passing along obedience. And we may find in that the Psalms are even better that day, the boring sermon that day touched us in some way, and we are glad we went to be with the people of God. Let us be a people of obedience, keeping the Sabbath and making it holy. Amen.